On the 12th of April 1928, on the outskirts of Dublin, a small airfield called Baldonnel was about to make aviation history. On that day, a German plane made by the Junkers factory, called the Bremen, with a crew of 3, the pilot Captain Hermann Köhl, the owner Baron von Hünefeld, and the co-pilot Major James Fitzmaurice, the commander of the Irish Air Corps, took off to make the first non-stop East-West Transatlantic Flight. Destination New York. I became fascinated with the history of this flight, and over the years I have collected many photographs and memorabilia connected with the flight. Now, 93 years later, I would like to share this incredible story with you. Since the successful first west to east flight in 1919 by Alcock and Brown, there was a race on between various parties to be the first to travel in the opposite direction against the prevailing wind, which was a big problem, and a number of unsuccessful attempts were made, including in 1927 when the German aristocrat Baron von Hünefeld, who had bought 2 Junkers W-33 monoplanes, one named Bremen and the other named Europa, based on the fact that he had obtained a certain amount of sponsorship from the German Lloyd line, who had 2 transatlantic liners of those names. And he had 2 crews of 3 ready to fly in 1927, and after taking off from Germany, they ran into bad weather, so the expedition had to be abandoned. So in 1928 they decided to restrict the attempt to one plane, so they flew the Bremen plane to Baldonnel in Ireland, and it was to be manned by Baron von Hünefeld, the owner, and Hermann Köhl, who had been a German fighter pilot ace from World War I, who was at that point working for Lufthansa. And the third member of the party was an engineer mechanic from the Junkers factory. When they got to Baldonnel, a row developed between the mechanic and the Baron, and the mechanic said, "I'm off to Germany," so they were left with 2. The leader of the fledgling Irish Air Corps at the time, Fitzmaurice, who had been a pilot in the RAF towards the closing stages of World War I, had himself been involved in an aborted attempt to fly the Atlantic the previous year. So they took him on as the navigator on this flight. This was them planning the 1927 flight, which was aborted. Right, these are actual photographs. There's one of the planes here, and this is one of the pilots from the Europa in 1927. These are the 2 crews from 1927. The Baron here, Hermann Köhl here, planning at the Junkers factory. So they took off on the 12th of April. Their intended destination was Mitchell Field in New York, which was the main airfield in New York at the time. They flew at about 1,500 feet most of the way, at speed of about 100 miles an hour. And as they got further from Ireland, they went to 6,000 feet. They lost sight, because of cloud and bad weather, they lost sight of the North Star, so they veered off course, and they ended up over Labrador. And they crash landed on Greenlee Island the following day. There was a lighthouse nearby, and that's what it sort of made the decision for them to land in that area. And a medical nurse who had seen the plane circling took a dog sled and travelled about 12 miles across country to meet them, to make sure they were okay. Luckily, they crash landed on a sort of bog which meant that even though the plane was damaged, they were unhurt. A number of planes then headed off from New York to rescue them. They spent 2 weeks in Labrador trying to fix the plane, but to no avail. This is the plane in Greely Island, propped up on wooden shafts when they were trying to repair it. And this is the family of the man the lighthouse keeper in Greely Island. That's the gang of them when they were in Greely Island. You can see the snow on the ground. So this is the Baron von Hünefeld. That's Hermann Köhl, that's Clarence Chamberlain, that's Fitzmaurice, Bernd Balchen, and the other Canadian pilot, Duke Schiller, who were the three of the pilots that came to rescue them. Floyd Bennett had flown up from New York, but a very famous explorer and pilot. But he was suffering from pneumonia, and he actually died on the flight to Greely Island. So when the plane arrived, he was actually dead in the plane. So they flew down to New York, where they received a ticker-tape reception, unprecedented. They were given the freedom of the city of New York, and they were also given the freedom of Dublin. Another photograph of them sitting in a car. This is the ticker-tape reception. So that was the 30th of April in New York. It was absolutely astonishing, the reception they got. That's them on the top of a building in New York. There's quite a few photographs of them here. This one is a reproduction of another one where they gave a speech with the mayor. Another photograph with Herta Junkers was the Junkers' daughter who owned the factory where the plane was made. She was a famous pilot in her own right in those days. The strange thing about her is never been able to trace what happened to her afterwards. It's another close-up photograph of them in New York. These are the families of the respective wives, and that's Fitzmaurice's daughter. So it's left to right is Mrs. James Fitzmaurice, Mrs. Clarence Chamberlain, who received them, and Patricia Fitzmaurice and Mrs. Hermann Köhl, as they appeared on the SS Dresden on their arrival on the 30th of April. They arrived from Europe on the SS Dresden. Clarence Chamberlain's wife, Clarence Chamberlain was another pilot who was involved in transatlantic flight. And while they were in New York, they had some various celebrations, and Fitzmaurice's daughter took part in a child thing, and she won some sort of prize. There's a picture with the doll, which is quite nice. Another reception type photograph, another reception in Boston. This was in Milwaukee. That was another reception they had in Milwaukee. And Calvin Coolidge, the president, presented them with the Distinguished Flying Cross, which was the highest honour that any airman in the American Air Force could obtain. This is the photograph of Calvin Coolidge presenting them with the Air Force Cross. And you can see that all three of them are wearing it in this photograph. This is Köhl putting a floral wreath on the monument to the unknown soldier in New York. This is Fitzmaurice laying a wreath on the grave of Floyd Bennett, because they attended his funeral when they got back to New York. Heading back to Europe then, they were on an ocean liner. Here they are on board waving to the crowd from the balcony here. The SS Columbus They took them back to Bremerhaven. Another photograph of them being taken on board ship as they're waving goodbye to the US. Amazing scenes in Germany when they came back. And because the Baron had worked for the Kaiser before the First World War, the Kaiser was in exile in Holland at the time, so he took them across the border into Holland to meet the Kaiser, which was quite unusual. A few years later, Baron von Hünefeld died and received a full military funeral from the Nazi regime, which is apparent from the photographs. Hermann Köhl, being a staunch Roman Catholic and anti-Nazi, decided to move his family to southern Germany to get out of Berlin, where he'd worked for the Lufthansa company for many years. By doing so, he stayed out of trouble and lived to see the end of World War II. Fitzmaurice continued on to lead the Irish Air Corps, and he made a number of visits to America to attend anniversary receptions. So that really was the story of the Irish involvement in the first east-west crossing of the Atlantic by plane. Skybirds, which was written to commemorate the flight. Well, the Irish and the Germans get together. Another song that was that's amusing, and they landed over here from over there, which is very appropriate when you think about it.
Say, Fitz,
What is it now?
they're out of gas. We've got to land.
No, by God, it's Mitchell Field or heaven.
But Fitz, don't say that. Oh, I see land. Say, Baron, where are we?
Herman, the Baron can't hear you. He's too near the motor, so let's land.
Look out! Hold tight. We're landing on the ice.
Here we go. What's that speck up in the sky? Why, look, it's coming down. Can it be that airplane that flew from Dublin town?
The crowd is going crazy. What a thrill for every soul. 3 names ring out upon the air, a brand new honor roll. Well, the Irish and the Germans got together. Something sure was bound to happen right away. Years ago they used to fight, but today they've made a flight, side by side as brothers on their fearless way. Through storm, through rain, through wind, through snow, they flew the Bremen o'er the sea with certain death below. Well, the Irish and the Germans got together, so let's give them a hip, hip, hooray.
Frenchmen, English, Spanish too tried that wondrous feat. Transatlantic non-stop flight, but all met with defeat.
Our Lindy flew to Paris, but from Europe to our land, it took the Irish and the Dutch, and they deserve a hand. Well, the Irish and the Germans got together. Something sure was bound to happen right away. Years ago they used to fight, but today they've made a flight, side by side as brothers on their fearless way. Through storm, through rain, through wind, through snow, they flew the Bremen o'er the sea with certain death below. Well, the Irish and the Germans got together, so let's give them a hip, hip,